The dollar has been declared finished more times than any empire in modern history. Analysts predicted its collapse after wars, recessions, debt explosions, and political dysfunction. Rivals announced replacements while allies prepared exits, convinced the center could no longer hold. Yet each time the dust settled, the same green bills returned to the center of global trade, unchanged, unavoidable, and dominant again. This was not loyalty, but gravity. Across continents, governments criticized dollar dominance while still pricing oil, settling debts, and storing reserves inside the same system they questioned. Even nations atomic to escape found themselves pulled back by contracts, supply chains, and financial habits built over decades. The dollar survived not because it was loved, but because the world quietly organized itself around needing it. Trade, credit, insurance, and trust began to orbit a single reference point. Once a system reaches that scale, leaving it becomes more dangerous than staying inside, especially when everyone else refuses to move first. The dominance did not begin with brute power alone. It began with an agreement struck in desperation, accepted for stability, and preserved through habit. That forgotten bargain still hums beneath every transaction today, waiting to reveal how trapped the world is. After World War II, much of the world was economically shattered, exhausted, and desperate for order. The United States emerged not only intact, but industrially dominant, holding most of the world's gold and the factories to restart global trade. In that imbalance, a new monetary framework was assembled, presented as cooperation, but designed for stability under American terms. Currencies were pegged to the dollar, and the dollar was pegged to gold. Stability arrived quickly, yet dependence spread faster. Trade expanded, shipping lanes reopened, and nations discovered they needed dollars simply to participate. Export economies earned them, import economies borrowed them, and banks measured value through a single reference point. Over time, contracts, debts, and reserves hardened around the dollar. When the gold link quietly disappeared, nothing else moved. Habits remained, systems stayed intact, and switching became unthinkable without triggering chaos. The financial language of the world had already been written. By the time governments grasped the cost, the system was no longer a choice, it was structural. Leaving would not just weaken rivals, it would destabilize themselves. And then the foundation shifted again, quietly replacing gold with something far more powerful. The consequences would soon reshape power, trust, and finance. When the dollar severed its tie to gold, critics expected collapse. Instead, the opposite unfolded. Freed from a rigid anchor, the dollar became more flexible, more liquid, and more central to global finance. Markets adapted faster than governments, and capital moved toward what felt usable rather than what felt pure. What replaced gold was trust in U.S. institutions, legal systems, and enforcement power. Investors trusted U.S. courts to honor contracts. Governments trusted treasury markets to remain deep and accessible. Corporations trusted that dollar-based agreements would be defended even during crises. The metal disappeared, but confidence scaled. Most importantly, everyone trusted that someone else would still accept dollars tomorrow. That assumption created momentum. Banks built systems around it, insurers priced risk through it, and commodities were standardized against it. The dollar stopped behaving like a currency and started functioning like infrastructure. Once embedded inside banking rails, shipping insurance, energy contracts, and sovereign debt, removing it became nearly impossible. Any alternative would have required every participant to switch at once, without hesitation or error. No currency could scale that quickly without triggering instability. Trust, once centralized, reinforced itself. Yet trust alone does not explain why hostile nations continue returning to the dollar. Even as nations publicly challenge U.S. dominance, many still rely on the dollar to breathe. Energy exports, commodity pricing, shipping insurance, and cross-border settlements continue to flow through dollar channels because no other system offers the same reach. Leaders condemn the architecture in speeches while structuring budgets, reserves, and trade around it in practice, creating a contradiction that grows harder to hide. This paradox carries a price. Attempts to trade outside the dollar often face thinner liquidity, higher transaction costs, and sudden political risk. Sanctions made this reality unavoidable. Instead of weakening the dollar, restrictions exposed how deeply it was embedded. Losing access did not create freedom, it created paralysis. Payments stalled, reserves froze, and entire supply chains slowed, not because alternatives did not exist, but because they could not scale under pressure. The dollar quietly crossed a line. It stopped being just a medium of exchange and became a gatekeeper. Opposition grew louder, yet alternatives remained fragmented, regional, and unstable, each solving one problem while creating three more. Escaping the dollar required coordination the world could not achieve, and every failed workaround hinted at a deeper flaw waiting to surface. That flaw would soon test loyalty, power, and survival. Rival currencies repeatedly collapsed under pressure because their foundations were incomplete. Some lacked open capital markets that could absorb sudden flows. Others lacked legal transparency that reassured investors when panic set in. Many lacked political and military backing that quietly guarantees enforcement during crises. When stress arrived, capital did not wait for explanations. It fled, exposing limits that optimistic forecasts had ignored. Reserve currencies are not designed to inspire passion. They are built to absorb shocks, remain predictable, and function even when trust is scarce. Most challengers failed because they amplified instability instead of neutralizing it. Tight controls created fear. Loose rules invited speculation. Each alternative solved one weakness while exposing another, and markets punished hesitation instantly. Digital alternatives promised escape but delivered uncertainty. Without sovereign enforcement or deep liquidity, they behaved like experiments during calm periods and liabilities during stress. The world did not reject alternatives out of loyalty to the dollar. It rejected instability. Replacing the system would require trust at scale, openness at scale, and sacrifice at scale. And no nation was willing to risk being first when fear still ruled decisions. That fear, more than economics, continues quietly binding the world to the dollar system today. For many countries, abandoning the dollar would trigger capital flight, currency collapse, and inflation before alternatives could stabilize. Deaths are denominated in dollars, imports are priced in dollars, and reserves are held in dollars, creating exposure that cannot be unwound gradually. The moment confidence slips, markets react faster than policymakers can respond, turning theory into immediate pain. Switching systems would require paying those costs up front with no guarantee of success. A currency transition punishes first movers, not laggards, and history shows capital seeks safety, not symbolism. Faced with that reality, governments hedge quietly, building alternatives while remaining inside the dollar framework they criticize. The dollar's dominance is not enforced by law alone,
but by consequences that arrive without warning. Leaving is possible on paper, yet surviving the exit is uncertain when trade stalls and confidence evaporates. That calculation keeps the system intact even as dissatisfaction grows beneath the surface. But dissatisfaction compounds quietly, concentrating pressure where trust is weakest and debts are heaviest. When the balance finally shifts, the exit will not be orderly or slow. It will test who prepared, who hesitated, and who waited too long. The next fracture will emerge from that pressure, not ideology or ambition. The real threat to the dollar does not come from rival currencies abroad, but from excess building quietly at home. Expanding debt, political paralysis, and the growing use of finance